Hello there, welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about Dune Part Two, which has just been released in the cinemas. So this is a very recent blockbuster, extravaganza, which is not quite the same as what you'd get from your usual summer blockbuster. It was meant to be released in the winter, then it was delayed because of the strikes, and now it's been released in March. But I think if we released it in the summer, it wouldn't have been the right place for it, because it is a film that doesn't really have that much action in it. I mean, it's part two of two. Part one had very little action. This is more action, but still there's a lot of talk, and it does feel like a kind of film you'd want to watch, like in the winter or, early spring. It doesn't have that all action, one set piece after another structure that that a lot of big movies are fond of. The good thing is that also means it doesn't cost as much as some of those movies that are ultimately very disappointing, because it doesn't need to have massive special effects scenes all the time. It has the special effects scenes when it needs it, but there's other scenes that take place, shooting in the desert, and they're very effective, but there's lots of moments where all you need is a tent and a couple of actors, and and a good lighting crew, and you're in good shape. So there's lots of things like that in the film too. There are big sets, there are some set pieces of special effects when the time comes, but it's ultimately about the ideas rather than let's blow stuff up. So the film follows on from part one. It's the second half of the Frank Herbert book, which was made by David Lynch in the 1984. It was made, or was released in 1984. It was a famously disastrous adaptation where most of the second half of the story was cut away, and that's what this film covers. Basically the stuff you got like in about half an hour in the David Lynch version. You actually get 2.5 hours, which is gives it a bit more space than Lynch had to explore stuff. But as I said in my review of the first part, yeah, it's more sane, but you miss some of the David Lynch insanity. Some of the stuff that Lynch did with the dreams and the dreams within dreams is more powerful than some of the stuff you get here. Here it's much more emotionally distant. So even though I can say this is a better version of Dune, the Villeneuve version, my heart's still with the David Lynch version. Even for all its flaws and all its insanities, I still have a soft spot for that this version can't really replace. Because I saw it at a certain time and I've watched it over the years. It's one of David Lynch's version is one of the kind of linchpins for me for crazy films that don't really work but are wonderful. Also, see also The Keep. This one's much saner, and the thing I take away from this one is it actually has the guts to actually have a darker ending. I'm not going into details of what it is and what goes on. It does follow certain conventions for a conclusion to a story, but there's some very dark undertones to it that the film doesn't shy away from. There's very dark undertones for the lead character that the film doesn't shy away from. He and Lady Jessica characters in this film do things that are fairly dark to survive, which leads to other events that are suggested are going to happen. That it's wonderful to see in a big mega budget film, but it's very unusual to see that. But find out what it is for yourself. I'm not going to say what it is for yourself because it's just a new release. I'm trying to keep it fairly spoiler free, but what the film does have is a certain focus and character and atmosphere, and being clear of the politics involved and who does what. It does give you a fairly good idea of what the machinations are in the novel. Now, I've read the novel years ago, so I can't remember everything about it, but it does feel like it has been close to the feel of the book. But you can also see that maybe it's not using his imagination as much as it could be doing, because the Lynch version uses imagination, maybe to its detriment, but it had a lot of imagination. This one is much more. It's beautiful, but it's much more grounded, and a lot of people like that. I mean, the film has received rave reviews generally, and people love it. And people say it's one of the definite sci-fi movies. Yeah, but it's also, it does have a kind of coldness that some people have said about the film. But the problem is that comes from the books. The books have a certain coldness to them. They've got like a god's eye view of what's going on, and Villeneuve brings you closer to from the point of view of the people as they go through these stories. But the actual overall story does take a god's eye view of events and where things are leading. So even though you're seeing a lot through the eyes of Paul and a lot through the eyes of his mother, there's other points of view in this film. The film pulls back. In the first film, you pretty much had the point of view of the Atreides, like what they were about and how they're betrayed and how they have to go on the run. In this one, you get that story continue, but you also get the point of view of the Emperor a bit more. You get a bit more about Bene Gesserit and how they were involved in the conspiracy. You get more about the Harkonnens. And you get a sense for the villains, and you get a sense of everyone's point of view and what people see of these kind of characters and how the people are using each other. So it's a film of people who can use each other quite efficiently. So it's that kind of maturity to it, which might put people off. It doesn't have that kind of gee whiz, dreamlike logic of a blockbuster. Blockbusters are meant to give you an entertainment fantasy, like I could do this, I could do that. This character feels a bit like me, or this character reflects bits of me, and I can feel what they're going through. And it's not direct one-to-one, but it gives you a feeling you can get behind the character. Well, this film's more distant than that. It's not trying to make you comfortable with the characters. You're meant to kind of question them, which means it's very different from something like Lord of the Rings, who, even though there's some evil characters, it is kind of safe in a lot of ways, where it's like you're going for your lead characters are fighting against darkness, and they will prevail eventually. That's a romantic notion. In Dune, it's like they might not, they might give in to some of the worst tendencies, which makes a more mature film than Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is a wonderful fantasy, but it's one of those ones where it's the reason I enjoy watching it but don't watch it tons of times is because it's a very kind of safe story, where Dune's a lot more tougher. It's like, yeah, horrible things happen, and doesn't always work out for the best, and the political factions of the story are much more tied to the real world, how cruel it can be and how difficult it can be, and how you shouldn't trust. The whole point of it is do not trust a messiah. Do not trust someone who looks like he can solve all your problems. That's not a good idea. And if you're in that position, do not exploit certain beliefs, because it could come back to haunt you. And there's that feeling throughout the film of a tension of there's an easy way and there's a hard way to do it, and you think, oh, they're going to take the hard way and it's going to work out great, and it's like, no, it doesn't really mean that at all. It's more interesting, more difficult than something like Lord of the Rings, where the final choice is just made up by, an accident with Gollum gets the ring and it falls into the pit. It's it's one more simplistic Lord of the Rings. Dune is more complicated. I mean, Star Wars took from Dune more than it took from Lord of the Rings, really. It took the idea of Dune, the desert planets, and the doomed protagonists, and the bad decisions people make. But Dune's a much more kind of grown-up version. Like, Star Wars is for teenage boys, Dune's more for grown-ups. It takes sci-fi conventions as a way to look at the world, look at, the Fremen are obviously, Arab nations, the different houses of the Landstrad, which is what they call it, which is the houses of the the universe are all basically the West. So there's lots of metaphors for the world, which was written in the 60s but hasn't changed much since then. It's just the way the world is just now. And I mean, it's like you always think, oh, the world's changing. Well, it is in some ways and it isn't in other ways. And this film's about just that kind of manipulation of the world and manipulation of events and people and how it can go completely wrong and how it can be more difficult than you can imagine. How people have their own agendas that don't always seem for the best. It's the people who have agendas that are there to keep their power, to keep their ideology. It's not really there for the good of the common people, you know. So it's got that kind of feeling. I mean, the cast is good. Shyamalan is really good as Paul, especially as the film goes on and he has to show some darker side to him. The supporting cast is good. Austin Butler is Fade Riot, who's the kind of lead villain for the Harkonnens, is a lot of fun as this twisted, evil creature of violence. Your Christopher Walken show up as the Emperor. He's the final boss of the story. He's like, it's interesting. Initially, he doesn't seem to be doing much, but actually, you realise he just puts people in front of him to let them get killed. He's a master manipulator, and he's like the final boss because he's the one you have to get to. And he knows a lot more violent people that are Harkonnens who he uses fodder to protect himself. And it's like, I'll use them. I'm not getting my hands dirty directly. I'll use the idiots who are into violence. And he's got his own reasons why he does what he does. And of course, those reasons lead to hell as well. So the film is very enjoyable because it's got a lot of depth to it and darkness and interesting elements to it. And the story itself is good. The whole idea of the Freman fighting back and then the counter surge from the people who want to rule the planet, and just how this war becomes something much darker than anyone could have imagined. And just the atmosphere is wonderful. So I don't want to go in much further in this film. It's just like, because it's just a new release, but it's definitely worth seeing. There's lots of good ideas in it. There's lots of things to chew over. And the good thing is it doesn't fall into the kind of nihilism you get from stuff like the original Blade Runner, which I actually like the Villeneuve version of Blade Runner more because it had a bit more humanity to it. But I mean, people love the original Blade Runner, and it's sort of in love with the nihilism of it in a weird way. It's like you can't really criticise it. And this film avoids that by going dark, but not going dark in a kind of chic ways, like having it all on the design as well. It's like, see me dark. In case you're too stupid to realise that the story's dark, I'll make everything dark. You know, it doesn't really have that, which makes it better because it's more subtle. So it's definitely a high recommendation. I enjoyed it a lot. So that's me for now. Go see Dune Part 2.